All right, so James and Alberto, they actually have their own presentation on their own slideshow they're going to present. So, uh, do you want to start off by talking about how you came together? So James and Alberto already knew each other, and they were kind of a obvious pairing. And so why don't you start off, Alberto and James, either with your presentation or however you want to roll with this?
Yeah, and strangely enough, for some reason, it's not. Oh, here we go. Got it. Hang on. All righty. Slides. Alberto, what do you want to talk, or do you want me to talk, and then you can just like beat up on me?
Yes, I like the beat up idea. Thank you.
Okay, cool. This has only tangential. This image has only tangential relationship to the show. What was interesting is so Alberto and I have known each other for like forever, and we've collaborated on a lot of stuff, just not art. But we've been also like trading ideas forever. So we definitely have like sort of a shared set of ideas and a sort of built-in language. It's like weird twins that like speak in tongues to each other.
And importantly, we're both sort of systems people. We like systems.
Yeah. What was funny was about a month or two into working on this project, like we just dove right in. There wasn't any like, oh, what are we gonna, how do we do this? Like a lot of hand wringing and stuff. It's like, all right, we're on, game on. And we immediately sort of, we're going to do some stuff with sound, and we're going to do some stuff with these images, and we want it to work in a certain way. There's certain things we wanted to accomplish. But one day we'd been working, and this is like a couple months into like working on this piece, and I started to articulate what was going on in my head, like at almost like a sort of emotional level. And I was really thinking about this as like the same way I thought about like when I was a kid, listening to radio in the middle of the night, and like those old radio dials where it was sort of backlit, and there's this, it's like 2 a.m. and you're kind of half hallucinating, half dreaming, and you're hearing some, some groovy soul music or something, like some R&B, maybe, WHUR circa 1981. And so I was kind of channeling that. And I think when I sort of actually articulated that to Alberto out loud, we were both like, yeah, there's something about radio frequencies and tuning and stuff. And so that's kind of, one of the things that was going on. We'd also talked about this project that we both knew about from, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. There were some artists.
2005.
Yeah, 2005. There were these artists who were making these pieces, and they were sold like there's a record distributor, Forced Exposure, that does like, that's where you go for all the weird experimental music. They're out of Boston, I think. And so like, they would, I think I ordered my first Buddha machine from them. So it was almost like this record label that would do albums, but the album wasn't a record. It was like, like a little plastic box, almost like a little bit of an oversized iPod. And then artists would do sound loops, and there'd be like 10 loops, and you basically just could switch between the loops and turn the volume up, and that was it. So I love this little form factor, and I think Alberto was also like kind of was into that too. From my end, I was working on the visual side, and I've been doing a lot of work that kind of looks like 19th century engravings gone insane. And we were talking about using engravings like for the visual aspect, making these moire patterns where you have multiple layers that interact with each other. And Alberto, I'll let you talk about wave interference because you can talk about that.
Class, damn it.
Yeah.
Can you go to the previous slide for just a second?
Yep.
So when we started talking about this, I mentioned I wanted to riff off of Gareth and Angela's sort of affinity for the metaphysical and the unseen forces. Gareth's a huge William Blake fan, and so radio was very evocative of that. And knowing that James worked this way, his recent work has been sort of meshes and fine line engravings on images, it sort of suggested an idea to me. And go ahead and next slide, please. So I thought maybe to unite the visual and the audio, which is something I do a lot of, I thought maybe we could grab some of the mesh work that James does visually and use it to create moire patterns. And moire patterns are a type of interference between two things. And it happens at all levels of wave phenomena, light and audio. For example, and it also happens on ocean waves. You have two waves that, if they're in the exact same sync, in other words, in phase, where the troughs match each other and the peaks match each other, if they're playing on top of each other at the same time, the result is a wave that's twice as loud. So a note that's twice as loud. By the same token, if the waves are exactly opposite each other, where the trough and the peak of each other happen at the same time, it flattens out the wave and the result is nothing, silence. So go ahead and hit the next slide. The idea then became to create sort of the Buddha box type format, but instead of having a speaker on it, to have something that produced a moire pattern as something else, as a control turned. And the control was this knob that turned the meshes one on the other so that a moire pattern manifested. And at the same time, it affected the sound that this thing would ultimately produce in exactly the same way, using wave interference to create what's a moire pattern in audio, which is usually called a beat frequency. So if you have two notes that are playing the same note together, that's called unison. But if one starts deviating from the other, the brain sort of listens, so the physical phenomena as it hits your ear, you hear these beats, which are the sort of the dark areas, the waves canceling each other out. So you have these beats that you hear when you do that, and you'll hear that in a second. The last part of it was that this was to be experienced by two people at the same time, to sort of riff again on the union part. And so there was going to be a sensor strip underneath the knob that allowed more effects to happen as one or more fingers touched it. So go for it. Next.
Do you want to just talk about the table real quick before I hit
Yeah,
play?
sure. So James is going to play some audio, and this is sort of an animation of the plan for the moire in front of the box. The table describes in seconds when different effects come in. And if you're listening to it in a stereo device, you should hear the beats coming in around 16 seconds. And that's when the destructive interference happens. And that's when one frequency is deviating from unison, from the same note that the other ear is hearing. So one of your ears is going to be hearing one note, the other one's going to be hearing one that's slightly detuned. And then at around 40 seconds, filter sweep comes in, and you can kill it whenever you want, James. Go for it. So one comment about this, and that is that the dark bands you see happening at the Moire effect are not really there. They're just an emergent pattern that happens because the light waves are clashing against each other. And those beats that you heard in the previous sound sample also really aren't there. That's just an effect your ear hears because of the diverging training notes, entrainment notes that are built into the tune. So Gareth and Angela both are sort of, like I said, they have an affinity to metaphysical, and they have, you know, they know a lot about esoterica. And the notes I used are sort of a pentatonic scale, which is kind of anodyne and a cliche of relaxing chimes that you can buy. So that was also a commentary on sort of the concept of union, which is sort of an idealistic concept, and having that be the basis for this other illustration of possible, adversarial effects as well. The next thing we needed to do was find out how to make this happen, and the idea was then to use a small computer. I used a small computer and plugged this thing called the Bella into it, which is a low latency device, which means that the computer makes a calculation and it plays a sound without lagging, and have a knob on it that would then cause the sound to change, and have a strip, a touch strip on it that would then play these different filters. So this is just a wiring diagram. It's kind of boring. Hit it. Oh, it has one stereo output, so we had to double it up somehow. This is the programming that went into it. This is a language called Pure Data, and this is the patch that plays and controls the interactivity. In other words, when people turn the knob or touch the patch, the sound changes in response. So it's sort of generative in some senses and interactive in others.
And it looks super cool.
If you don't understand it, that's because that's your Moire effect in coming into play here. Next.
So yeah, once we actually had like sort of the guts of this thing, we had to figure out how to like contain it. And I'd actually spent a good part of last year doing a lot of 3D printing and having to solve some really practical problems using 3D printing. And what was really awesome was when we were working on this, like over at Otis Street, there were a couple of times where we were there, and Dave he's like the guru. And so I'd be like, man, I don't know what I'm going to do here. And he's like, oh, just get a hot knife and just slice right through the thing. Or, like I learned so many cool tricks from just like Dave looking over my shoulder and being like, hey, this is a much smarter way to solve this problem. And I'm like, hooray. So anyhow, while Alberto and I were working, like I was, I was designing stuff in a program called Fusion 360 to actually build the housing for this. And you can see like Alberto and I would get together and like we'd scribble down frantic notes and be measuring things with calipers. And, so this was like, I don't know, pretty hands-on stuff. And it was all new stuff for me, like learning how to solve these kinds of problems. This is actually like a cutaway of me, like working on how all the components fit together. And, I had to figure out how to break this thing up into manageable, printable pieces. And then once we had all the crap, here we are over at Otis. You don't see all the beers that I was drinking. They're kind of stashed off to the side, but I was drinking a lot. And yeah, we had a great time.
No, you were not.
It was super fun though, because like I remember like the days that we went over, it was like always beautiful and sunny out. And then Chris would be there and Dave would be there, and we just like, I don't know, we'd start putting on Devo like really loud in the studio, and I don't know, listening to like old school electronica, and I don't know. So we had a lot of fun doing this. This is like the beast, like, we're gluing everything together, like, and this is like it better work because we can't unglue it. This is like the final, like, holy crap. And then finally, this is it up on the wall. And that's what we did. That's my science fair project for show and tell. I think that's all there is. I'll leave the slide up just to, like, I don't know. We can talk over it. Dave, what do you want to know? I can tell you're chomping to ask me questions.
Well, I was just thinking about the sound waves, like canceling out the other sound waves, and so much focus was around harmony and union and being in sync, but yet you have this kind of hidden struggle that can also go on within a unit.
What I thought about was the sort of two people coming together like two fields, two collections of lines of force sort of colliding, and sometimes the waves sort of help each other and resonate in sympathy, and other times it's sort of adversarial and it demands compromise. So that was sort of a very rough sort of metaphor that I was trying to get at with that, and that we talked about and made happen this way.
Yeah, as even the conflict, the resolution of it still comes out beautiful and creates a whole out of it.
I mean, that's the work that goes into a relationship. Sort of the smoothing out the rough edges is a beautiful thing.
So the one thing with the two of you, I mean, you really did like jump right on it. As soon as we said, hey, we're doing the show, we want you to work with one another, all of a sudden your brain started going crazy. And I remember when you came over to look at the space, you wanted the whole front corner because you were going to do something really huge. And which trying to curate a show where everyone started off wanting to do something huge, and then everyone kind of went smaller, and I was like, oh no, did I invite enough artists? Which I picked just the right amount because you don't want to overhang the show, and this commands a lot of visual space. But what made you actually go to this concept versus some of those earlier grand ambitious concepts? And do you want to share like one of those big ambitious concepts?
I honestly cannot remember anything before this, and I don't say that like I'm not being facetious. Like I really I can't remember what we were thinking about. What the fuck were we thinking?
I gotta say that in my case, just from experience, I know try to colonize as much space as possible and then work backwards to reality. But
spoken like a European.
Yes, right, exactly. Now the thing was that it was so easy to collaborate with James because we know each other and we share a lot of the same approaches to things, that it was super easy, and it was so organic that I can't remember, like James, I can't remember the early concepts. They just sort of melded into this quickly.
Well, when you came over, one of them like involved making this giant chandelier out of tubes that did all this weird voodoo, hoodoo, electronic, magical stuff.
I want to do that now. I don't know what that is, but I want to make it.
I have no recollection of that, Dave.
Voodoo chandelier.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you were just brainstorming when you were in the space, and the two of you, your imagination was just going so wild with ideas. I can't believe neither one of you remember it, but it's probably just you thinking out loud, and I'm sitting there listening. I'm like, whoa, wow.
Yeah, no, I don't remember.
I'm writing down voodoo chandelier though, because that's going to happen.
Well, it's voodoo chandelier with electro magic stuff.
Cool.
You got to write all that down, James.
You know what I will say?
Thanks for your support, Dave.
The collaboration was easy, but like it was a really challenging piece to make. Like it wasn't like it was like easy. It was like, oh man, how are we going to pull this off? Like I personally know nothing about electronics. I barely know anything about sculpture. I barely know anything about 3D printing or 3D modeling. And I don't know a whole lot about sound other than I like to listen to stuff and I understand some of the ideas. So just coming up with practical stuff. I mean, Dave, you were there. You saw me struggling with like, how am I gonna, okay, let's get some duct tape, get the clamps out, let's start clamping shit together. It was definitely a challenging piece to make. So it wasn't like, oh, it was just easy peasy. It was like a fun, super fun challenge. And I had a great collaborator to like experience that terror with.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this definitely was a very ambitious project. You also did laser cutting. There's gears inside. There's mechanical aspects, in addition to all of the programming and the sound waves and the concepts of how these sound waves are going to work with one another. I mean, the amount of planning this and the conceptualism is just mind-blowing.
There wasn't a whole lot of planning. It was mostly seat of the pants. Like, how do I fix this shit right now?
I mean, we had a good organizing principle at the beginning, and that sort of guided us. But we really couldn't meet face to face often. So, but it fell together nicely in retrospect. There were some dicey moments in between, though.
Yeah, what he said.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, well, I'm wanting to ask about this dicey moments, but I guess that can be another time. Okay.
Idea to object, it's a very long road. So that's what I mean.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you were there for some of the dicey stuff. Like when I had to get the hot knife, it's like, I don't know how I got to make a hole in this thing right now. And you're like, oh, just fire up the hot knife and it'll cut like butter. And I'm like, okay, cool, this works. But like getting all those layers sandwiched together and like secured so that nothing slipped out of place while you're trying to like squeeze everything and don't crimp any of the wires. And it's like, it's like doing surgery, you're sweating like, okay, doctor, forceps, somebody wash my hands.
Suction.
Captain tape.
Yeah, so it was totally fun having the two of you work here at the studio. I mean, the first day you came, you thought you could finish it at the studio and hang it that day, but then you had to take it home, and we kept pushing the opening of the show back, but I wasn't telling everyone. Because of people like James and Alberto, but it all worked out in a nick of time. But it was super fun having you here, and like Jenna and Travis also worked here, which it was just great. After the place being empty for so long, having people in here working that normally aren't here. But
and drinking
beer. Thank you, Dave. One more thing I'd like to do before I go, and that is. You may be able to see some Moire on my t-shirt as I move along here.
Oh,
cool. Yeah.
Right?
I'm just getting blur.
All right. Well, that's a type of, that's your computer unable to render Moire.
Okay, so yeah, I'd like to open it up to any questions or comments.